Hi guys, welcome back. This is animation part 2. So today we're going to touch on rigging and a few other principles such as constraints and controls. We touched on controls with the eyeball and we touched on constraints with the eyeball. We're going to delve a little bit deeper. Just a heads up, this is not a concise rigging course. Rigging is a very specialised field, but I'm hoping that this introduction to joints and constraints and binding will give you an overall picture of how you can use the tools in your main project. So firstly, I just wanted to have a little talk about constraints. Now, you guys know how parents work. Basically, you have a child object and a parent object. The child object uses the parent object's transform data on its pivot point and copies that data and follows it around. A constraint is a little bit different in that you can narrow down what you're going to constrain. So you can constrain certain channels. You can also turn constraints on and off dynamically, so you can animate constraints happening. So say you have a hand and you constrain the location of a sphere. You're actually tapping into the attributes of the sphere and telling the hand's attributes to control the sphere's attributes. So it's a bit different than parenting. What it means is, because you can animate it, you could say have a hand holding a sphere and then you could animate the hand letting go of the sphere and no longer constraining the attributes of the sphere. So constraints are actually a really powerful tool, and they're in the animation menu set under constrain, and these are the different types of constraints. We're going to use a parent constraint and a point constraint today. You're already a little bit familiar with the aim constraint from the eye rigging tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is create a skeleton for this hand here. So before you rig anything, of course, you've got to freeze transformations on the object. And we're going to use the joint tool to create a skeleton. So we're going to start by placing those joints in the top view. So I'm going to switch to the top view and I'm going to switch to wireframe mode so I can actually see where I'm placing. So I'm going to go skeleton joint tool, and I'm going to place one joint at the shoulder, one at the elbow, and one at the wrist. So this is the skeleton for the arm. I'm just going to hit enter and that completes the skeleton. Now, skeletons have their own inbuilt parent relationship. So the root joint is the first joint in the hierarchy, and the joints down the hierarchy are its children. So I'm just going to open the outliner and just show you this relationship. So we've got 3 joints, a shoulder, an elbow and a wrist. I'm just going to quickly name them. So this will be shoulder joint. So as you can see, the wrist is the child of the elbow, which is the child of the shoulder. Now, if I select the wrist and hit Shift P for unparent, I now have a floating joint on its own outside the hierarchy. To link it back into the hierarchy, just do a standard parent relationship. The other thing I want you to notice is if you look at the joints themselves, the x-axis is always pointing to the child joint. Now you can actually edit which axis points to the child joint, but for basic rigging like this, we're always going to keep it x to child. If a joint gets rotated out of shape and the X is no longer pointing to the child, just select the root joint and go skeleton, orient joint, and the joints will pop back into the correct rotation. So I'm just going to place these joints a little bit better. So I'm going to move to the side view, go wireframe, and I'm going to use the up and down keys to navigate my hierarchy. So this is actually the front view, so I'm going to bring that joint up, hit down to go down the hierarchy, and bring that last joint up into the wrist. This shoulder is probably placed too far outside this mesh, so I'm going to move it in. Now, because it's a parent, if I move it, I'm going to move the whole skeleton. There's a way around this. If you hit the insert or home key, just like a modify pivot, you can move one joint at a time without moving its children. Okay, so I've got the arm currently in place. I'm just going to name my mesh as well. It's not named, so that's arm GO for Geo. So at the moment, we've got a shoulder, parent of an elbow, parent of a wrist. I'm going to create some finger joints now. So I'm just going to switch back to my top view, and I'm going to use the skeleton joint tool, and I'm going to draw a knuckle, and another one there, another one there, and I'm going to end the chain with an end joint, and hit enter. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that chain, and I'm going to move it over here, and Control D again, and Control D again. So now I've got my fingers. I'm going to use the rotate tool to kind of place the chains a little bit better and move them into position. Now, because a joint because Maya has to reference a joint's position in world space, you can't freeze transformations on them. You can't zero them out, and you wouldn't want to. Maya needs to be able to know exactly where the joint is in relation to the whole scene. Okay, so I've got 4 fingers, and I'm just going to create a thumb. And I'm going to delete that last joint in the thumb chain, because I know I just don't need that kind of joint resolution. Okay, so now I'm going to start using all 4 views to kind of place these into position. So just placing them as best as I can. Okay, so now I've got my finger joints in place. Before I link them, I'm just going to name them. So I'm just going to start with the pinky. So I'm going to call that pinky joint 1 and expand my hierarchy. So I'm just going to do some copy and paste work here. Pinky joint 2, pinky joint 3. So go ahead and name all your joints. Okay, so I've named all my joints, and I've just expanded them in the outliner so you can see the titling here. Alright, so now I need to bring those fingers into the hierarchy of the hand. Before I do that, I'm just going to check the orientation of these. So you can see the joint before the X or the red axis points to the child. At this point, that's not so for the root joint, which, if you can see this one here, it's actually pointing off center, which means when I animate, it's not going to rotate true. But we can come back and fix that with the skeleton orient joint command. Before we do that, I'm just going to parent these to the wrist, and I just want to check, I think I may have rotated some of these joints, so I want to check that there's no rotate information in the channels. See, this joint here on that second knuckle has -11 in the rotate channel. So I'm just going to freeze transformations on that and zero it out. Like I said before, you cannot freeze transformations on the translate channels of a joint, but the rotate channels should be zeroed out before you bind a skin or create controls. So I'm just going through and checking there's no info on them. Yep, good. So they're all 0. And now I'm going to connect these into the hierarchy of my skeleton. So I'm going to select the thumb, shift select the wrist, and hit P for parent, and go through the fingers one by one. Okay, so now I have a complete skeleton. Just going to open the outliner and once again expand my hierarchy, just so I can see my relationship. So I mentioned before that in a standard joint relationship, the x-axis should point to the child joint. You just want to go through your joints and check that's actually happening. Just to be safe, if you want to select the root of your finger joints and go skeleton, orient joint, and just have a look through, and if any of them are slightly off axis, Just use the command to line them up. So you've got a skeleton and you've got a mesh. Now we're going to work on an IK handle and an IK control. So in normal animation or forward kinematics, if you wanted to rotate this finger, you'd first rotate the shoulder, then the elbow, then the wrist, then the finger, and you'd work your way down. IK is the reverse. If I wanted to animate this finger, I'd just grab the finger, move it, and the arm would follow. So we're going to do a bit of IK here. So before we do, we're going to create a control for our IK. So I'm just going to create a circle, and I'm going to do it looking down the body of the hand. So create NURBS primitives circle, and we've just created a circle. So before we assign this circle to be a controller, to control the IK handle we're yet to create, I want that circle to be sitting in perfect harmony with that joint, so perfectly lined up. So I'm just going to hide my mesh, Control H, and select my controller, scale it down a bit, and I'm going to hit the W key to move it, and hold the X key to snap it. And I want to snap it to the pivot point of this joint here. And to be more accurate, we actually want to snap it to the pivot point of the IK handle, but the IK handle will be created at this joint. So use the V and the X keys. So hold the V key, move it around, hold the X key until you snap it dead center of that joint. So I'm just going to duplicate that circle there. I'm going to create another control for the shoulder. So I'm just going to hold the V key and snap, and yeah. Alright, that's perfect. I was going to give these a title, so I'm going to give this one, I'm going to call it shoulder control. So shoulder, and I'm going to go CTRL for control, and this one's going to be my wrist, IK, CTRL for control. So now that these controls are in position, I'm just going to freeze them. So modify freeze transformations and modify freeze transformations. And now I'm going to add this IK handle, and I'll show you how to do that. So the IK, the inverse kinematic tool, is going to exist between the shoulder and the wrist. So go skeleton, IK handle tool, bring up the settings, and we want rotate plane solver. Just reset it and make sure rotate plane solver is activated. Select your shoulder and then select your wrist. Okay, so after your controls are snapped and your IK handle was created, you should have a pink skeleton. If you just have a look over here in the channel box, your IK handle can be zeroed out. So let's just zero that out to default. So go modify freeze transformations, and now this is our 0 position on our IK handle. Just going to see if it's working. Just dragging it around the viewport, and I've got a inverse kinematic arm. I'm just going to hit 0 in my channels and bring that back to home. I'm going to select the root of my skeleton. I'm just going to use this handy Maya shortcut. I'm going to right click, hold right click, and go set preferred angle. And so now that I've used the set preferred angle command, I've got a way of zeroing out my channels really quickly. So if I select this IK handle and move my arm all out of shape and I want to zero it out, all I have to do is select the root joint, hold right click, and go assume preferred angle, and I'll go back to whatever angle I've set. So I've run out of time. Please open part B of this tutorial.